call this meeting of the Commission of the Town of Gulfstream to order. Please rise and pledge the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ready, would you call roll?
Commissioner Ganger.
Here.
Commissioner Stanley.
Here.
Commissioner White. Here. Commissioner Orthwein. Here. And Mayor Morgan.
Here. We've been provided with the minutes from last month's meeting on February 13. Are there any corrections or additions?
This may not be a correction, Mayor, but I think in the first part of the minutes where the public comment on All Aboard Florida, I think either she meant to say or she said and didn't get that the trains will not go at 110 miles an hour south through the county, but rather once they hit the end of the line, they'll go 110 miles an hour, 79 miles an hour out across the road.
I think it says speeds up to.
I know, but it's a little bit misleading because a lot of people think that they're going to be 110 miles an hour
Here.
straight from, and that's not the case. Not that 79 miles an hour isn't fast, but just what I was saying.
Okay. Any other changes, corrections, amendments? If not, if there's a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second. Rita?
Commissioner Ganger.
Here.
Commissioner Stanley.
Here.
Commissioner White. Yes. Commissioner Orthwein. Yes. Mayor Morgan.
Yes. Any additions, withdrawals, changes to the agenda items?
I have none.
There are none. Our next meeting is April 10th. All commissioners will be present. Anyone know if they have a conflict? Very good. Communication from the public. Anybody care to speak? Mr. O'Hara.
Thank you, Mayor Morgan. Chris O'Hare. At the last commission meeting on February 13th, just prior to the end of the meeting, announcement was made regarding a federal RICO case. I noted Mr. Sweetapple came into attendance and joined us just before the announcement. I also noted once the meeting was adjourned that Mr. Sweetapple took the accolades of admiring public and received credit for the federal RICO case. I don't mind that. People have a right to their opinion. I don't think he did a great job, which we'll find out in the future, but some people made comments to the commission about the enemy and how we had to do whatever we could to get rid of the enemy. And I don't think requesting records or taking the town to court makes anybody an enemy. I think that might even violate the decorum policy. So I just would like Mayor to be aware of that and perhaps keep things under control in the future. Thank you.
Anyone else care to speak?
I would please.
Mr. O'Boyle?
Yes, I'm going to need some accommodation. Thank you, Rita. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I was out of town during the last meeting. However, I did read the minutes. I see that the town has finally filed their RICO action. And although I may be saying this wrong, if I remember right, the mayor said, I'm tired of, I don't want to be put in 1,000 cuts of glass or something like that. Do you recall that, Mayor?
Proceed, Mr. O'Boyle.
Is that a yes or no?
And this is not question and answer, as you know. We've had these colloquies many times.
Well, I think that you're now put yourself in a position where there are going to be 10,000 pieces of glass, and I certainly would hope that no one were to be injured, particularly in connection with this outstanding. Mr. Boardman spoke. The epitome of ignorance. Spoke about how this is such a grand idea, but when you pop the hood, he never looked at the engine. Never even saw if there was an engine that was there. And I mean, I commend you, Mayor, for getting that kind of support, where people don't even look, and they support you. And I have to tell you, I commend you for it. Thrasher says that and I don't like to read my writing, but there's an abuse of public records, abuse of the Public Record Act. And I know this isn't question and answer, you've admonished me enough on that, so I think I finally got it. But boy, would I like to know what the abuse is of the Public Records Act. That's something that I'd really like to find out. He also says that there's dozens and dozens and dozens of lawsuits. And he, I think, although I've never counted them, is correct. I think there's probably dozens and dozens and dozens of lawsuits, and most of the dozens and dozens and dozens of lawsuits have been filed by you and you and you and you and you and you and you. That's what I think. And I think I can demonstrate that. Last month, I think $135,000 in legal fees. I may be wrong on that, but I think it was about $135,000. Mr. Thrasher, I read something recently where he said it was $1 million. And I say to myself, to give Chris O'Hare or me a document that we want, rather than do that, we spend $100,000 or in fact $1 million. Now, that may be sound thinking to the commissioners and their council, but it's certainly not sound thinking to me. And I see that you have your cheerleaders here. Nothing wrong with that either. They're entitled to be your cheerleaders. But I wonder what the whole town would say about it. Why don't you send out, Mr. Mayor, I think this is a suggestion, you don't have to respond because I know you won't respond because you've admonished me enough. Why don't you send out another one of your letters explaining how much money you're spending and what the win is at the end of the day, and what you intend to do, how much you intend to donate should you lose this RICO suit, and how much you intend to donate, Ms. Orswine, if you lose this RICO suit. And you know what? I think I'll find you both behind a bush outside, hide down. Because I don't think either of you are willing to put up a nickel. I think you want all of these folks here to pay. And if it doesn't work out, oh well, we tried. You should only do something if it's right, and you should only do something if you really feel it's going to be successful. And if you all feel that that RICO suit is going to be successful, I better not say it. I'm afraid I might slander somebody, so I won't say it. There's, as I said, a lot of litigations. We have now, you, according to Mr. Thrasher, spent $1 million. There has not been not one, record suit that went to court yet, not one. Because you stonewall and you stop every single one of them. So one wonders, why would you do that if you're going to be so successful and you can get rid of them quickly and at very little cost? Because they're costing you a great deal of money, probably between $25,000 and $50,000 a copy, which is beyond, as Mr. Richmond would say, ludicrous.
Time is up. Thank you very much for those comments.
I don't think my time is up.
I believe it is.
It is.
And anyone else care to speak? If not, let's move on. Reports underground utility, Mr. Brown.
Danny Brandon Gillespie. This week we received the demo streetlight fixture came in midweek. And we're getting a couple of bids, competitive bids for changing up, and that should happen next week. You'll be able to see what the street lights would look like based on the recommendations we've had to this point. The budget, we were going through looking at the phase one cost. We found some of the engineering for phase two had been lumped into phase one, about $10,000. So that number will change on the next report that was found this week. When we did the initial surveys, we locate meters, transformers, and things like this for the assessment methodology, and for the utility company to use in their analysis. And about half of that cost was phase two cost. So that number's been will be adjusted next month. Comcast and AT&T are continuing to do their work. They were waiting to get the final plans to make sure that their cable routing and all was well understood and to develop the details, and they're still engineering their plans. The landscaping, we have a couple places, one on Eden Harbor and one on at North Road and A1A that we want to try to do some work in that we think we can do without worrying about the removal of the poles that are going to impact you. Other than that, we're beating on FPL to try to make sure that we're not paying for things we shouldn't be paying for. We had probably $150,000 in transformer costs. We're trying to verify that we were going to be paying for. The indications on the drawings are that they're maintenance activities and not undergrounding activities. So it's either there's drawings or not properly labeled, or they're charging us for stuff that we don't need to be charged for. We're also involved in looking at the design, because there are some idiosyncrasies in for instance, running power to one side of the house when it has to go to the other side of the house, and it cannot go there from the configuration they have. So we're in the middle of trying to resolve those issues to make sure the plans are buildable. We're also trying to look at the conflicts with the asbestos concrete water lines to make sure that we're getting the most cost-effective routing. But that's an ongoing issue. And that's basically where we are. Take any questions you might have.
Danny, when we were here last week, you didn't swear on the Holy Bible, but you came pretty close to saying that the phone company and the cable for the phase one would be on the ground soon. And you also showed us, or Phil had, a copy of the contract we had with the phone company. And it would appear to me that you could interpret that as being that they have to move forward. It isn't that it's at their discretion, but they have to move forward. What's happening?
I think they will start. Now they're doing the pre-work. I think that I had indicated that I thought it would be some length of time to get those facilities put underground in phase one.
You did, but you also said they were going to start, and if you
Yeah,
don't start, it would be infinite amount of time. I mean, we got to start taking those poles down, and I just, it's appalling to me that we're still waiting for them to begin to do something.
The engineering work on the part of the utilities, AT&T probably has less to do, Comcast has probably less to do. But for them to get their plans all put together, which they're working on now, takes a little time. I mean, it took FPL a year to get their plans together for phase two. When I say that they'll start removing wires, that's going to be probably in, I guess right now would be 2 to 3 months. It would be the earliest to start to working on the work they have to do to get the wires removed. They are starting that.
What do they need to do?
Pardon?
What do they need to do?
They need to look at our conduit routing and make sure that it's compliant with the facilities they have, and then they will do the detailed engineering and cable ordering. The engineering, particularly for AT&T, they pre-order cable with all the splices and all the service extensions on it. And they'll send those orders off to vendors, and vendors will fabricate those cables, but they won't fabricate those cables or get the designs or anything until we give them the plan showing where the conduit is. So that they've had the plan now, and they're working on the engineering side.
How long have they had the plans upon which they could send out to their vendors for prefabricated line?
Well, they've had the plans probably 2 months. Once we got them from High Power, this is what was put in the ground.
So they've had a couple months now to
And
take
then they'll-
appropriate measurements.
Then they go through the engineering process, configuring, and then they send out to the vendors to fabricate the assemblies.
Do you know whether they have sent out the measurements for bids from their vendors on those prefab lines?
I don't know where AT&T is exactly. I can find that out.
I think we need to find that out, because once that's awarded, that's gonna take time.
I have sent them a request to give me status updates on what their schedule looks like. I'm waiting on a response to that.
But for the benefit of our residents, aren't those orange conduits that are sticking out of the ground, isn't that where the lines are gonna go in? I mean,
Right.
they've been there for 9 months.
Right.
So when you take a
But
measuring stick and
they've been there for less than 9 months.
well, they've been there for a long time.
Some of them, as we go through the process of installing those things, they don't run out here and check what we've done this week and what we've done next week. They wait till we get complete,
I understand that.
and then we give them the as-built drawings, construction drawings, and those are the things that kick them off to start their process. So we see the pipes a long time before they start working on their final project.
Is it the same issue with Comcast? They too must review the plans and sub out prefabricated line
They don't sub out prefabricated lines, they build theirs with
Themselves.
those cable pieces like the power company.
and what's their status then?
And they also have the information, and they're working on it, and they've got to get back to me on a schedule.
I think the frustration is, and as you know, we've talked about it, we've looked at what contracts there are on this, and we're looking for that degree of legal emphasis that brings them to the table within a certain period of time to get this work done. There's nothing in the agreements that would even suggest they have to begin work in any set period of time, and that's what's so frustrating. And I've been sitting here now for a year, this commission, hearing what you've reported, and it seems to be about the same. And I'm not being critical of you. You're kind of being the marionette at the end of the string from Comcast and AT&T. But it seems to me this town may need to take some appropriate steps to force the issue. And I think I would like to get some comments from the other commissioners that if we don't get a fairly definite resolution of this from Comcast and AT&T shortly, then I would say a month, that the town be authorized to look into taking other steps towards the issue.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir. Mr. Board.
I've had some discussions with Danny at your request and looking into this.
Excuse me. Can't hear you.
Sure, some purpose. And so what you, if I have it correctly, I'm gonna tell them something they don't want to hear. How long did you say it took from the time they were given the go-ahead to move their cables to Jupiter Inlet Colony, or maybe it was Jupiter Island? How many years it was before they got it finished?
It's between 2 and 3 years. And we're still resolving the final billing on that.
2 or 3 years, from what time to what time?
From approximately the middle of 2010 to somewhere in 2013, maybe early 14.
From the
It was
time-
from the time the power was in and finished until the utilities were in and out.
And for the record, their mayor came here and spoke to us just before the final decision was made to have a referendum or whatever we call it, to determine whether or not the town wanted to go ahead.
Right.
And at that point in time, their mayor made it very clear, we're close to the end of the rainbow, and I know he thought that that would be completed in a much shorter period of time than has actually happened.
And the mayor was highly involved in the process. Jupiter Lake County fully aware of what's going on, as was Charles Falcone in Jupiter Island. And they were fully aware, they were in the meetings that we had with the utilities, et cetera. And Mayor Sumfer and I are still talking to other municipalities about doing the projects. He is still very high on the project. We just had a presentation with Palm Beach Shores. They're considering undergrounding their town. But
Well, if I understand you correctly, though, that at least based on your experience, you could be looking at least another year to bring Comcast and AT&T underground.
right, yeah, that would not be unreasonable at all. I do think that AT&T has a lot of existing underground compared to what we've seen and what we had to do to accommodate them, that their work should be pretty minimal, relatively speaking, based on, relative to the size of the electric.
Okay, well, I just want the commission to be aware and to voice any assent or objection to our continuing to aggressively pursue this. Mr. Boardman's been very helpful, Mr. Ganger as well, in trying to advance this as well as best we can. Any other comments from commissioners, from Mr. Brown? Or from, I'm sorry, yes, Harvard.
Could we have, I hesitate to ask for a
Excuse us,
status
please.
report.
Could you use the microphone? I'm sorry.
We have a status report on phase 2, and perhaps there could be some thought given to writing into the agreement some timing issues.
As I indicated, we're right now in the middle of trying to resolve issues with the FPL designs. The participants with AT&T and Comcast are people we have worked with a lot in the past, and we're more comfortable with these participants than some of the other locations. We're working on projects in Jupiter, Hollywood, Pompano, different locations. And I think our biggest obstacle on phase 2 at this point is resolving the issues with the Florida Power and Light designs. I think that we'll attempt to create a better contract and a better execution schedule. In the contract we do with the electric utility installation, we have penalties for overrunning the schedule commitment. I have had some negotiations with some of the executives out of Atlanta with Comcast relative to installing their cable for them. We may want to, and the local manager was involved with that. And they all know that the executives agreed that they would be willing to talk to us about doing that.
Danny, that seems to make sense, because in fact Comcast uses outside suppliers for virtually, I've hardly seen a Comcast person it's always a truck with some no-name on it that Comcast hires to do their dirty work. It's not that complicated. Take pole, stick wire in conduit, pull it and hook it up. This is not rocket science.
Right, and their contractors are very inexpensive.
Yeah.
And that's one of the barriers to us taking that over is cost. It will probably cost us twice as much to do their work as it would cost to have them do it. But if time is of the essence, then we'll have to weigh that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about $20,000 instead of 10, it's the absolute amount that we're concerned about. We can't go over this budget. By the same token, we can't have holes in the sky for the next decade. So,
So we have no timing estimate.
Phase-
Last time for phase two, you said 2016 maybe?
Yeah, we're
Gotta
still,
be 2018 by now.
yeah, and I think that the end of 2016 is still our target for making sure that all of the FPL stuff is transferred over and converted and installed.
That's just FP&L. It's the goal.
I mean,
18 is not, based on what you've said, an unreasonable expectation.
We're looking right now to try to get FPL done by March of 16, about a year.
well,
Which means we have to, and that's probably a reasonable scope, 9 months of construction and then the bidding and awarding advertising.
I think what the residents really care about is when is the whole project going to be finished? The various stages, we don't really know. You're very obviously very familiar, but the estimate of when it's done.
I think it's gonna end up being somewhat of an issue of how hard can we push the communications people to get done. Because beyond March or April of 2016, when the power's all in the ground, then we have to get the Comcast AT&T converted. And it may be that we seek some extraordinary type contracts. We typically have used their contracts. They're no longer Public Service Commission related. They are not the provider of last resort, so they're unregulated utilities and the leverage. We tried to take them out of the play in Jupiter and Lake Colony. We were going to go and talk to all the residents and ask them to convert to Comcast because Comcast completed theirs relatively quickly and expeditiously. And we were unable to make that happen.
because they didn't want it, or
Why? Why?
The residents, some of the residents that had AT&T wanted to keep their AT&T.
Are there going to be additional contracts, installation contracts, scheduling dates?
We
That's
yeah,
to
we
be
have not,
negotiated?
we have not negotiated the phase two.
Phase two. But if I understand you correctly, phase one has already been negotiated.
We
to
have
what extent?
we have the contract from FPL, but it has not been
And you're
executed.
thinking in another year probably to get both AT&T and Comcast down underground on phase one,
Right.
right?
Another year before we can start their process.
A year before it starts.
I mean, they can give us an estimate now, but until they get our as-built drawings on the work that we do in phase two, they will not detail engineering and all those things that they do when they start their work.
You're running 2 years from the time the power switched over on phase one for the communications companies, and then you're running 2
for the benefit of the press or those of us who are not technical in any way, is it safe to say that if we get a hurricane, the people who live in the south side, all of their wires are underground, and presumably if a tree goes down and takes down the wires, you're not gonna have phone, you're not gonna have cable, but you might still have power? Is that a,
Yeah, you will still have power as long as the line's.
that's right, the
roughly
line's coming
north
up,
or-
but I mean, if the line is coming up, so, you know, we've achieved about a tenth of what we set out to achieve, but at least we've achieved something. And I just can't imagine, you know, what we can do, but we've got to find something to do to get the phase, at least phase one finished. That gives you a template for negotiating phase two, gives you lots of things. I
think we're gonna be negotiating phase two before phase one is
that's what it
finished.
sounds like, that's what it sounds like. And
But, I think we need to have several people involved in those negotiations. So when that time comes up, please bring that to my attention. Mr. O'Hare.
I seem to recall.
Could you come to the mic, Mr. O'Hare?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I seem to recall that I was assessed like $25,000 or $30,000 for the underground, and I think that's money well spent. It's a great project. Personally, I've worked with these same bureaucracies that Mr. Brannon's facing, and I know it's not his fault. This guy's probably doing a great job, but these bureaucracies are unbelievable. And sometimes it's happened that when you reach the end of your rope, you talk to somebody there and you find out, oh, well, we have an expedited service if you want to pay a little bit more money. I would suggest the commission perhaps ask Mr. Brannon if there's a way for a little bit more money, things might move quicker. It might be worth it as opposed to waiting for another 4 years or whatever it's going to take. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions to Mr. Brannon from the public? From the commission? Mr. Brannon, do you have anything else to add? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Report of the town manager.
I have no report.
Next, architectural review of the planning board meeting, March 26th. Look forward to getting the minutes from that meeting. Finance director's report.
I've submitted the financial report, asked that it be reviewed, and I would answer any questions that you may have to the best of my ability.
Any questions? The financial report for February. And accept that as submitted. Police chief activity report. Questions of chief report.
I request that the February activity report be accepted as submitted.
Questions? If not, accept that as submitted. We move to commission action. This is a revised site plan for 3250 Polo Drive. Have there been any ex parte communications or activity by commissioners on this application?
Not by me.
Okay, and who will be presenting that?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Cudmore approached me and spoke to me in hall. He has withdrawn his request to put this exfiltration system in our right of way. I've asked him for a written document, and that he said he would give to us right away. So this just happened a couple minutes ago, so it's resolved in that he doesn't, is not wanting to do that anymore.
Well, is he not going to add the second driveway entrance?
Sorry. He does want to add a second driveway. The site plan,
Is he going to present that application?
no, he's not.
Well,
I
that's
told him
the
it was all right to leave, that's my error. I can tell you that the ARPB approved the revised landscape plan and the additional location of a driveway entrance. It was approved or recommended for approval unanimously. Staff has no problem with that additional driveway. Under our current code, they will provide a swale just south of that driveway on their own property.
I have a problem with it.
Okay.
I've visited it, I've seen this house a number of times. It's a house that looms over Polo Drive. Really the garage aspect of the home. Skip?
No, I didn't mean to
Discuss
interrupt you.
this, or since it's not
Well,
live?
it seems to me if he's not here to present it, that maybe you should just defer it
Yeah.
if it appears there are objections, so that he'll have an opportunity to address it. But
I think the
you can
issue
go
is-
ahead
yeah.
and make your statement so that he'll know how to respond.
Yeah, be happy to make it, and I agree, I think, in my opinion, it's been withdrawn, it can be resubmitted, or I guess we defer it.
I wonder if I should leave the meeting, trying to get him back over here. I don't know where he is. We may have a cell phone number. I don't know how much time we can allow for this.
Well, we don't have much to go.
Okay, see if he can be here in a couple minutes.
I guess,
Give it a ring.
since it was your suggestion.
Yeah,
keep it correct.
sorry, I wasn't thinking about that part of the application. It's minor, not his.
I think we also have members of the public here who might be affected and would like to comment on it as well. So I'm sorry, we're going to try to give the applicant a little time to get over here. Present the application. It doesn't appear that we have anything else, but why don't we just, while we're waiting, move to item B, comments, items by commissioners. Anything you'd like to? Okay.
We spoke at the last commission meeting about Old Florida, possibly getting together a resolution, and I wondered if anything's gone forward about that.
I have not seen one yet.
Mr. Bailey, let me
Yes,
comment on that.
I did see the.
Subsequent to last I seem to have had a lot on my plate recently, and I was going to work with Christine to make sure that what she presented was expanded upon to be relevant to Gulfstream, because what she was talking about was generic to the coastal communities. Their stuff is happening so fast. I'm sure you all are aware that there have been 2 horrific train crashes at sidings recently. And then the bridge north of Palm Beach, a 100-year-old bridge, failed. And freight trains were backed up practically from wherever it was to back to Miami. I mean, you could just imagine you have a 2.5-mile-long train, and one of them can't get over the bridge, therefore the ones that are coming in behind it can't. And imagine what might be the case if you also had 2 passenger trains coming, and those bridges don't fix themselves. So the safety issue looms as well as all the other issues. I feel that we probably should get a better handle on the impact of events on our community, as opposed to generically, do we think it's a good idea or a bad idea? Because remember, it's private property, it's technically privately financed, albeit through bonds that may be tax-free, and that's a cost to society because somebody's not paying the tax. Plus, who holds the bag if it fails? And most people are saying they think it will fail, that is Aalborg, Florida, and that it may be a ruse in the first place for a real estate play and for another track for trade to be able to add more freight to the system. There are some pretty smart people who refute some of the concerns of the public, and I think in fairness we ought to be balanced and have our facts on both sides and determine what any kind of resolution we might make might be. We have done a fair amount of homework with the folks in Boynton Beach, and their right-of-ways crossing the tracks in their town are all going to be upgraded through public financing. So it's not going to cost the taxpayers of Boynton Beach anything. The operating cost, there will be a cost in Boynton Beach, and they think they can handle it. They think it's a benefit to their town to have better upgraded crossings with better safety equipment. So, understanding how our other towns are looking at this, I think could influence any resolution we might have. And because of the recent events, there are 2,000 crossing accidents in this country a year where somebody is either killed or injured. Now, that's a lot. And you're putting these on 20, 50-year-old, 100-year-old tracks. They go right through the center of town. That's very different from a crossing somewhere out in the boondocks. So it's a more complicated process, and I just think we'd be remiss if we didn't do our homework first and think it through before making any commitments in the form of a resolution. The worst thing to do is have a resolution that doesn't have any impact whatsoever. So I'm long-winded, but it's pretty complicated, and I think we ought to do the right thing rather than do the fast thing.
Are they going to be fixing the bridges too, all aboard?
Well, that's the whole point.
That, you know, I mean, are they
yeah.
going to shore up those bridges?
If that bridge alone is very old, and it was really built for a different era, totally different era. So I think that they are going to have to really think through, and as I believe Christine mentioned, they've raised $4 million locally, out of people's own pockets, to fight this thing. So I mean, the impact on us is nowhere near the impact on them. And I think we ought to let that play out, because if that plays out in such a way as that it's delayed for 10 years or something like that, then we'd be a little ahead of the game.
Mr. Penrose here.
Okay. Any other comments on all aboard? All right, let's move backwards then. The revised site plan for 3250 Polo Drive. Applicant is here. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding.
Does he have to be sworn in?
Would you be sworn in, please?
Raise your right hand, please. You swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank
Good morning.
Good morning. I think, should I speak?
Yeah, just
Okay.
introduce yourself for the record.
Terry Cudmore, I live at 531 Palm Way, and I'm the builder on the Clark residence at 3250 Polo Drive. And I think what you have before you is a site plan where we revised the site plan to show a second driveway addition. And at that time, we had also proposed doing additional drainage work. We meet all the requirements for the drainage on the site as it is, but we had proposed doing additional drainage work in the front of the property because 3250 has historically been a tough spot. There's always been standing water there. But it seems that it's a difficult thing to do drainage work in the right-of-way, or since we don't own that property. So what we have done is we've revised the drainage, the additional drainage work, not required drainage work, so that everything is on the Clark's property.
Where was it previously?
If you look at the site plan or the drainage plan, it's showing basically what we'll call a French drain that is 3 feet on the Clark's property and 3 feet into the right-of-way.
And now you're proposing to move it forward.
To do everything within the property lines.
I've got a bit of a concern with the second driveway, frankly. This house was originally approved based on a certain street view, which had one entrance in the middle facing the front door with considerable amount of foliage to block the fascia of the building, the front. It's a large building. It goes straight up. It's a looming building, particularly the garage, which is the closest element to the street. That foliage blocked it a bit. And by opening up this second driveway, I think you change the aesthetic complexion of that property. It actually provides two views to the massing of the house. That's my concern with this new driveway. I also note that this is side, but it appears that the second driveway has already been started on construction without approval by the commission. That is a bit of an annoyance to me. So those are my two comments. Any other comments or questions?
The driveway is technically just a motor court, is it not? I mean, you just, that's a place to park your car.
It's actually, the second drive is actually the access to the garages. As the plan was presented initially, there was only one drive where that basically went into the front door of the house, and then you would have to wind around. You know, the previous home had exactly the same driveway that we are proposing. It's just, it's far too cumbersome to go in by the front door, make the right turn, and swing around to the left, as we, you know, sort of did it in the dirt, the things with the Clarks. You know, we took great care to make sure that the garages in this case are not facing the road, which, and that the opening for the driveway is going to look through to the rear, that we're doing landscaping. It doesn't actually look directly at the house. But I mean, this house is going to be very nicely landscaped here. I think you can see by just by the trees that we have in so far. You know, the Clarks are taking great care. They want to do a terrific job with this.
I'd like to hear from any affected neighbors.
Mr. Mayor? Good morning, Tony Graziano, 3259 Polo.
Have they been sworn as well?
I
need
don't
to be
think
sworn.
so. Read it
You
there.
know,
Sir.
Swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Let me voice my frustration again at what's been going on at 3250. We're coming up on the 17th month anniversary of construction across the street from my house. There are serial violations of the town ordinances with respect to the hours, days, times of construction. Mr. Thrasher knows that, and I commend the commissioners for helping out with passing a recent amendment to the resolutions having to do with the hours of work to put some teeth into it. If you have listened to the meeting of the Architectural Review Board a couple of weeks ago, you might have noted I was particularly hot that morning because they had started at 6:45. We then had about 3 or 4 days of peace, and then next week they started at 6:50, so I got an extra 5 minutes of sleep. Thank you very much. And I know, Mr. Mayor, you don't answer questions today, but let me pose some for the record. Mr. Randolph, what applicable federal or state law makes it impossible for the town to enforce the resolution they just passed, 01415, effective immediately, as the resolution states it is? Next is, if there is no such federal or state law, why was it bad drafting on your part that the resolution cannot be effective immediately? Because clearly Mr. Thrasher has taken the position that it cannot be effective immediately, and that 3250 is exempt. All right? So I have those 3 questions that I'd like somebody to answer for me. I do have a last point. Mr. Cudmore and the Clarks are here today asking you for something. No matter what the answers are to the questions I posed, why can you not, if you are inclined to grant them what they're asking today, put a condition on it that they will abide by the revised regulation or resolution, and they will be subject to fines if they wake me up at 6:45 in the morning? Now, I must say that I think Mr. Thrasher and the police have been doing what they can under Mr. Thrasher's interpretation of the resolution, and that is that it doesn't apply to 3250, by many mornings assigning a police officer to sit outside the work site. I appreciate the effort, but that's, in my view, a very poor use of police time around here. And it doesn't work when they only show up at 7 to 7:15 and the work starts at 6:45. Thank you.
Mr. Borton, I don't know that you were sworn last time.
No.
Swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Bill Boardman, 3251 Polo. We're at a bit of an angle, Tony's more straight across from the house. I didn't really get up to talk about the work rules, but I think Tony made a wonderful discussion there. I've read the new resolution. It's excellent. I wonder, as a suggestion, if a summary of it might be prepared and given to all of the workers that work in the area and make it clear. I mean, just getting them that document's kind of rough. But I know he had a terrible time last summer, but so I'm very sympathetic to his comments. I had a couple of comments regarding the driveways and not being an engineer in any way. The creation of the second driveway has filled a significant part of the front yard with hardscape bricks. They're gray in color. I don't know. I think it's about finished, as a matter of fact. We have had so much trouble in the core area with water. And I don't know how many feet they had to raise that lot to come into compliance with flood zones and all that. But just based on the water we had before in the street and the water you see places like up at the north end of the street, I think you were going to have engineers look at this for the town and be assured that the on-site drainage that's proposed is adequate. If it's not, I would like to have, just a commitment from the builder, if you decide to go forward with this, a commitment that if in actual application over the years we see there is a water problem there, that they will take the necessary steps to fix it.
What's the role on that?
On the
Has someone?
enforcement of working,
No, let's start with the last point first. That is, you have engineering representation that the drainage design will keep water on the property. What if it doesn't?
well, the drainage plan that has been provided and reviewed by our engineers does provide that the first 1 inch of runoff is to be stored and can be exfiltrated or located on their own property. Those numbers have been verified. The code that we enforce only says 1 inch of runoff. In a 3 inch rain event or greater, if there's going to be pooling of water in many locations in our town, this is what the agent and builders and owners are obligated to do. They have met that obligation. Prior to construction of and demolition and building of a parking area, which the commission wanted to make sure that construction workers had a space to park. Prior to that time, there was a swell there. We are a swell community, S-W-A-L-E. Probably not pronouncing it correctly, but at any rate, that's how, we don't have curbs and gutters, and in this location, we don't have a nearby positive outfall. So, the town actually, for Mr. Sipp, when he owned it, created a swale, and it worked reasonably well. But during construction and the placement of drainage rock in the parking area and the sloping of all of the land, that area right there towards the street, there was absolutely no ability for any percolation of water in that front area. So yes, we've had our engineers look at it. Yes, the calculations are met, and yes, it's all on their property.
Okay. Obviously,
And
it can't prevent all runoff
No.
on heavy rains. I guess that's the best that can be done as an engineering analysis. How about the other point? Because this has been coming up with a number of residents, but Mr. Graziano in particular. It seems particularly outrageous, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I would either stand corrected on what I said, or try to clarify what I said. Mr. Cudmore was not required to sign that document because that particular document and revised resolution did not exist at the time that he started. It is my understanding, and I could be incorrect, that our police department has issued citations at 3250. I'll refer that to
Yes, we have, with regard to parking, we have issued quite a number of citations at that location, which would be our own parking tickets. And that doesn't affect the new ordinance arrangement one way or the other. We can always do that, and we have done so. But we are still limited in our enforcement with regard to the new ordinance, because it is, as town manager said, has not been signed off by.
What if it's signed now?
If I assume that if he is willing to do that voluntarily, that should resolve the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't have a problem. Since I started this job, I've known that the working hours are 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening. From the get-go on this job, we put up a fence. There's been a sign there saying no work shall start till 8 o'clock. There's been a lock on the gate. No one has worked there. What we're talking about is people who have pulled up to work early. And while there may have been something happen at 6:45 in the morning one day, that's not, I don't want you to think that this is a regular occurrence. It was a truck that came from Clewiston with trees on it. They left in the middle of the night because it's hard to get a truck that side in. They parked in front of the property. Maybe they shouldn't have, somebody should have called them, but we're not talking about workers going in there working. We're talking about cars that pull up before 8 o'clock. I think that's correct. And again, there's been up until now, we're almost finished. We're 60 days away from finishing. I put up, I thought, a very nice fence. I gravelled it. I did the best we could for parking. It's very difficult parking. We only have 150 feet, and we're trying to get finished. I've been trying to work with the police regarding parking. I've been parking cars at my own house, parking cars at the town, doing what we can, but things happen. But again, I know what the hours are. I would never argue with that the hours are 8 to 5, and I would sign anything that, those are the town rules. I've always been very good about abiding by the rules. But what we're talking about again is people coming from, not everybody lives here, coming from Miami or West Palm or whatever, and showing up and pulling up, not working. And for the most part, since we started this project, if there was a car there at 7:45, the police tend to come by and tell them you can't be here, and they leave. I think the chief would agree to that. That's been the issue, is people pulling up, and for the most part, I mean, again, everyone on my subcontractor list has received a letter from day one. I have a full-time superintendent. I have a full-time superintendent assistant on that job since day one. There's never been no Cudmore representation there, so we've done our best. We know the working hours, so it's not that I'm flagrantly disobeying the rules here.
Well, I appreciate that.
I know what the rules are, and I've really tried my best.
Yes, ma'am. Come up and be sworn, please.
Can I say Rita Trouble and Source both at the same time?
Swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
My name is Robin Graziano. I live at 3259 Tony's Way. I have just a few things to say. Number one, when the construction started, there was no sign that said what the hours were. That came about 3 months ago, or 4. Never for that whole first year was there a sign that said you may not start before 8 o'clock. I was shocked when I saw it. I thought, why didn't they put it in when they started? They didn't. The other thing is, other workmen had keys to get in that property. Because when I would go out in the morning, there was nobody there from Cudmore, but there were other people who were backing their trucks in, and they had the code, the key, or whatever it took to get in there. So I sort of disagree a little with what you say, but I live there. I saw it, and I know that there was nobody letting them in. They got in themselves. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. O'Hare?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope you don't take anything positive I say about this gentleman to make him guilty by association with me. I don't know him, never talked to him. I have a quick question. Well, first of all, a comment. It's a public road, right? I mean, if a truck comes through there with its muffler blaring or whatever, it might be guilty of a sound, audio violation, but it is a public road. I don't think you can tell people you can't park there or be on the road before 8 o'clock, whether they're working or not. But that's not why I came up here. Is there a specific statute that says you can't have this driveway cut that he's asking for? I mean, a code that would preclude him from doing that, needs permission for you to get the driveway cut?
My objection to it is based on the neighborhood and the aesthetics of the building vis-a-vis the closeness of it to the road, particularly the garage, which is the furthest point out. That's my concern, and I'll be eliciting any comments from the public on it as well.
Well, I appreciate your answer, thank you, yes. One last point. About 12 years ago, the late Honorable Mayor Koch gave me a lady palm, put it in my yard. It's the very same one that same type of Commissioner White has on her house. But I was brought before code enforcement for having that plant on my house because it wasn't in the code. And I know there's been discussion that maybe you shouldn't interpret the code that way, but those plants and other plants not in the code are on this application. And I'm thinking, is it now the town's policy, especially that there are no prohibited plants except invasive species, that any other landscape plant is okay?
Now, you've raised this any number of times, and what we refer to, as I understand it, the landscaping plan has been reviewed, it's consistent with the code. We accept that. You disagree with that, of course. You've disagreed with almost every application that's come before us. You make the same objection. So, duly noted.
Okay, no, I appreciate your comment, and I don't disagree. I think it's a beautiful plan. I like the plants he's put on there. Just want some clarification. Thank you.
Mr. Board?
One more quick one on this subject. I think, just in fairness, we've watched a lot of construction in the area. The roads are so narrow, it's difficult. Even these huge trucks have to come in, they have to make those corners, and they cut the corners and so forth. As far as parking is concerned, at least in our experience here, I have not seen it handled any better than these people did. The fence was great, the gravel area was, they worked hard, as I see them, to try and get people in there. And it's far different, for instance, as the house to the south that was built a few years ago, where we had vehicles lined up clear down Palm Way, clear up Polo Drive. One suggestion, though, I think that the town might require is that the landscaping in the front of the house be the last thing that's done. Because the only suggestion I would have made to the parking that they did was that they put the landscaping in, well, it looks like it's going to be about 90 days before the project. And it's made it, they've still woven the vehicles in around the palms, but they'd be able to keep more in there if the landscaping was just as a matter of general principle around here. The last thing in the front yard, and then the front yard can be used for parking right up to the end.
Thank you. Any other comments on anything that's been discussed relative to the application? Commissioners, comments?
I just have a question, which will probably seem like an obvious one. So the additional curb cut and the driveway change from what was submitted in 2013, the connector between because I got one plan, which is basically the tree plan, it has the connecting driveway. Maybe a question for Mr. Cudmore. And the other two plans appear to have the connector between the motor court in front of the house and the motor court to the north of the house going into the garage. That's no longer there, correct? Is that being removed?
Correct. Just in an effort to reduce the hard surface and help with the drainage in the front of the property, we've eliminated the connection of the two driveways.
And then the So your hardscape, is it gonna be about the same, or is it less on the caps? I know it's pretty small writing, but you probably know off the top of your head, it's probably less. Or for at least related to driveways.
Right, it is actually, as I recall, because we increased the amount of drainage on the rear of the property as well as that front area between the two driveways, I think it is actually greater now than it was before.
And then where's there's sort of a drainage plan here. I know that the town manager just looked at it and had the couch reviewed. Where exactly, again, is maybe Mr. Thrasher or Mr. Cohen, where exactly is the French drain going by the proposed new driveway cut? I mean, I did have a brief discussion about the application with the town manager yesterday, but we didn't get any great details. Is it, you can approach, come on up. We don't have the big boards. Really know what the heck we're talking about one last time.
Okay, it's not shown on this
I was a lot younger in 2013. Rita, I'll mark this and hand it out once I get oriented, so it's in the record.
Bill, we don't seem to have the
Because I don't know what I'm looking
drainage
at.
plan.
No, it's not here.
I know it was reviewed at the Architecture Review Board meeting, so there must be.
This is the same,
Is that it?
this is what was at the architectural review.
Kind of saw a little bit of an overlay on the old one. So I always ask the same question about the deco drains for the driveways, which sometimes go in, sometimes don't, and you got the swale, and you got the.
This is not, it was,
And I included this, which was not with the application, that was the original.
no, it was a plan done by Chad Brewer, and it was here for the last meeting. I think perhaps, Bill, do you think it was something else? You know, it was very clear.
No, I'm not seeing it either. I'm not seeing it either. I'm trying to think how I can obtain it. I'm not sure where it is.
I would read it because I would think that within these paperwork it must be here.
This is the paperwork. This is it.
I'm going to read and try to print out the document that I sent to our engineer, which did include that particular file. If you find it before I get back, that'll be better.
Okay.
Because I just don't remember.
Yeah, there's a
I
very
have
clear
rough-
drainage
I have
plan
a rough
that's prepared
idea
by Chad
of where
Brewer.
it is, and I know that you're doing some drains and whatnot, but everybody's worried about the slope and the water pooling, even though.
It's still going to happen. If you
Yeah.
stand in the site,
Sure.
the water comes down Lakeview like a
Right.
river under, so it has nowhere to go. It stops in that corner of the property. And it's just a low point. We're doing our best to take care of it. We've done this French drain system and reduced the hard surface, but it's not going to cure it.
Well, we can probably just move on if Bill wants to find, while Bill's finding, and just talk a little bit about the trees and the landscape real quick for the mayor's comment. I think we're probably about where we need to be to make some sort of decision.
Yeah, if you would please describe the landscaping changes that you're proposing.
It was just, you can see where the driveway is. I think they put 4 modules in place of what were, I can't remember the other palms. It was just a replacement of palm and basically just some shifting of trees on the property and some additions on the left rear. You know, there is going to be substantial landscaping on the property, and I reviewed it in detail with the Architectural Review Board that approved it a couple of weeks ago, along with the approval of the driveway.
There is substantial landscaping already there, trees. I mean,
Right.
it's up there.
Yeah, no, and the reason for bringing it in now was we had to get the trees in so that we could locate the underground drainage properly and do the irrigation work. The timing is working out quite nicely. We're going to be finished there in about 6 weeks.
How high is, we're spending a lot of money
We're spending a lot of money on landscape.
How high is the ficus hedge that borders the?
The existing ficus hedge is, I think it's over 8 feet tall.
Is it healthy now?
It's in pretty good shape.
I had a question that, I'm not trying to wind the clock back, but just for my edification. the garage elevation is shown at 6.2 feet, 6.2 inches. Is that on the 1929 or the 1974 or whatever it is? I can never remember which is NGVD.
It's, no,
It's the
you're
old-
texting me.
older
There's
than-
NAVD and NGVD, and the difference is, I think, about 18 inches.
Yes, it is 18 inches.
I believe it's NGVD, and, you know, I believe the new minimum is 8 for the finished floor
Yeah.
of the house.
Yeah. So this is below the new minimum. The finished floor is below the new minimum.
Well, the finished floor of that house is not the living floor. You can have, you know, uninhabited space like a garage and
Yes.
step down. Otherwise, it would be a drastic pitch from that
I
garage to
understand.
the road.
I just, it's a question of fact, not,
Yeah,
not,
we have it as low as we can so that there wouldn't, be, you know, to minimize the difference between the road and the
Is
garage.
there any portion of the driveway that's permeable, that's using some?
It's all pavers, it's
All
all
pavers.
Sunset pavers.
I have one more question. The connector between the driveways in front of the house and the
Yes.
garage, it's gone, right?
It's
not
gonna-
here.
we-
Or
we made
what's it
s-
going to be?
it-
Because it's showing here.
It's going to be stepping, it's going to be a pathway, a walking.
Like stepping stones
Yes.
with grass in between? Okay.
Yes. So I think you now have the drainage plan.
We do.
And, so it's, what's happening is the drainage is really, there's a large area in the rear here, large area in the rear here, and a large area in front, right in front of the house here. This is the big one. What we've done is, these two areas here, which are not required for our drainage plan to meet code, have added these two, and it's a combination of gravel and like a silt. And so these two areas, which were on city property, because the property line runs right down the middle, have been moved about 2 feet back and made a foot narrower. So although these aren't required, you know, we're doing it because, you know, as much as the town doesn't want to see pooling water there, the Clarks really don't. They don't want to go through all this and end up with standing water.
The new drain field in the new yard area where the connector was previously is south. Well, I actually have one of those in the drain. They work, not quite that big, but it works quite nicely.
You know, we made it as big as we could to try and take care of this. Again, nothing on the front is actually required, but it's all just additional damage.
Bill, what's the title of our contractor policy that are signed with new applications and permits?
I'm sorry?
What is the title of the policy for contractor?
That they sign for.
The ordinance.
For parking or the
No,
construction?
For construction, it's more than just parking.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, what?
Is that what you?
Yes, I'd like to incorporate it in a motion.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Can I intervene?
Yes.
It sounds like the applicant has indicated that they would be willing to sign the contractor's affidavit that is being required by the town at this time. So I think you can incorporate that in your motion.
Thank you. Contractor's affidavit is what we'll refer to it as.
Does the applicant understand what we're talking about? You're
Well,
willing?
I'm very clear. Those rules have been in place. It's just, I mean, it's not that we needed to sign them, but there are rules here, and if you don't abide by them, you tend to hear from the police fairly quickly. You know, whether it was doing renovations on my own home, I lived on Polo while the R. Scotts and the Davis, I mean, it's a tough thing to manage, and you have to hope that you do your best. I mean, signing the affidavit isn't really gonna do anything different, but I'm happy to do it.
And if I can make a point.
Yes, sir.
It is gonna do something very different in that the contractor is responsible now for regulating and policing the site, and he would be responsible to accept any citations that were issued as a result of failure to do so.
Do you understand that, Mr. Treadmore?
Yes.
Okay.
Again, though, a question is, you know, can we police a vehicle pulling up and stopping in front of, you know, is it illegal to be on the street at 7:45 in the morning?
general comment, this is, for the folks in the audience here, this is kind of convoluted. We have the mayor's comments with respect to kind of aesthetics. We have some technical comments with respect to managing water flow. We have other comments with respect to work process. And it was my understanding that the purpose of this was to approve a driveway and to approve the changes to the, oh, there he is. I'm looking at the back of it. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Just for my reference and for the folks, the thing that we are asked to vote on is the driveway and the drainage.
No, just driveway and landscape.
Just driveway and
The
landscape.
drainage,
Okay,
I don't
drainage
believe,
is-
requires approval.
It can be and was approved. Okay.
Any other comments, questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir, Mr. Rossi.
Since this stuff gets pretty technical, again, it's a question you can answer it or not. Is it the rule that a construction vehicle cannot park on the construction site before 8 o'clock, so that when they show up at 7:30 or 7:45 to start drinking coffee and get ready, but they haven't commenced work, that the police could actually chase them off? Because we've never complained about them. Just, I'd love to be able to, but I didn't previously think that I could stop them from showing up at 7:30, 7:45 and just drinking coffee outside of the fence. We only complained once they started work that we could hear them. But it would certainly, if it's possible, it would be certainly nice if the chief could have his fellows stop them from having their coffee clutch in the morning at 7:30. Thank you.
At least with the vehicles running, perhaps.
Barbara Sloan. I agree with Tony that what is extremely annoying is these gigantic trucks coming and stopping right outside my bedroom window and keeping the motor running for 45 minutes for no reason. And whether they're working or whether they're waiting to start to work, they have awakened the people who are sleeping, particularly when they're arriving at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and I think it's just reasonable. I'm sure you recognize that, Mr. Cudmore. Workmen have to get there before the start time, but turn off the vehicles. Allow them to turn them off. Any other comments, questions? If not, we should entertain a motion.
Do we need do you have any condition to sign the contractor's affidavit that Mr. Thrasher just submitted? Do we need to go ahead and approve the revised drainage plan showing the 2 front roadside under drain sections moved onto the owner's property, or are we coming back with that, or is that done administratively?
I can do that administratively.
Okay.
I have sent an email stating that we are not going to put any drainage on town property.
That's in the record.
Okay.
Okay. Tom, you voiced up here.
I make a motion to approve an amendment to permit application 13-147965. Should know the address. 3250 Polo Drive, to modify the driveway as proposed by the applicant, removing a connecting driveway in the front and adding a French drain there and additional landscaping, and also adding a additional curb cut to the motor court to the north of the property.
And subject to
the contractor signing the contractor's affidavit, to be subject to the rules and regulations that were promulgated by the town a couple of months ago.
So second?
Second.
Rita?
Commissioner Ganger?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanley?
Yes.
Commissioner White?
Yes.
Commissioner Orthwein?
Yes.
Mayor Morgan?
Yes. Anything else from the commission? If not, thank you all for coming. This meeting is adjourned.